Remember when the 2011-12 Bobcats won like 7 games? To this day, their record of 7-59 in the lockout-shortened season still remains as the worst winning percentage in the history of the NBA. They were so bad, they didn't even need to sit out their starters near the end of the season to lose games, because their record was far and away the worst of the season. The second worst team, the Washington Wizards, had 20 wins, nearly 3 times as many as the lowly Bobcats. So what was their reward for all this? The second pick of the 2012 class, which they used to draft Michael Kidd-Gilchrist.
The Charlotte Bobcats select Michael Kidd-Gilchrist of the University of Kentucky and Somerdale, New Jersey.
This is the classic example of a team that tanked so hard, yet they still fail to benefit from their efforts. And in this video, we're gonna take a detailed look at not just the Charlotte Bobcats, but 4 other teams who also put in a tremendous effort to tank. But it didn't work out for them, and they didn't get the player they were hoping for. Let's get started. There's a misconception that this Bobcats team did not purposely try to lose. They were just so bad they simply could not win anything. While it is true to some extent that they lacked the talent, there were also several indications that management wanted to lose on purpose. First, they traded away their 2 best players, Gerald Wallace and Steven Jackson, within the previous year. The 2 of them led the Bobcats to their first ever playoff appearance not too long ago, so to just get rid of them so quickly seemed out of character, unless they had a plan. Then, over the summer of 2011, the Bobcats signed some horrible free agents like Melvin Ely and Reggie Williams, and then gave them a ridiculous number of minutes on the team. Additionally, as the season progressed, the Bobcats gave more and more possessions to Kemba Walker, a rookie. While Walker would go on to become a very good player in the future, his rookie year was one of the worst rookie seasons in history, just by his sheer volume of shots and how poorly he shot. As the season progressed, the Bobcats gave him the green light to do whatever the hell he wanted, and he'd shoot them out of the game. While Michael Jordan firmly stated his intention wasn't to tank, I have a hard time believing that. Every team knew that the 2012 draft would feature a projected once-in-a-generation talent, Anthony Davis, a future superstar who would most certainly change the outlook for Charlotte. He was the consensus #1 pick, the first draft with a consensus #1 pick since LeBron James back in 2003. Everyone wanted him, it was guaranteed he'd go #1. But nobody wanted him more than the Charlotte Bobcats. Unfortunately, the Bobcats rolled the dice and did not get him. Instead, they landed the #2 pick, which they used to draft Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, a bust. Despite the 2012 Bobcats making history as the worst team ever, they got rewarded with basically nothing. But it wasn't the most blatantly obvious tank either, since this team was hopeless to begin with. Which brings us to the 1991-92 Minnesota Timberwolves. The Shaq sweepstakes. There was only one player anyone cared about in the 1992 draft, Shaquille O'Neal. It happened to be the first time when the term tanking got used in the NBA media, as the Minnesota Timberwolves were just obnoxiously bad. As a new expansion team that's only been around for a couple years, their expectations were quite low, and the only way to build up their team and establish any sort of foundation is to get lucky in the lottery. The front office knew this, and so they concocted a plan to lose as many games as possible by restricting the minutes of their best players. Take a look at this. Compared to the previous year, their starting lineup now played significantly fewer minutes, about 5 to 6 minutes less, and they'd sit out most of the 4th quarter if the Wolves were in danger of winning. This culminated in a 16-game losing streak, from February 29th until March 29th. A whole month where they didn't win a single game. They actually lost 23 of their final 27 games, with a heavy minutes reduction from their main scorers. Yet many of those losses were so close. They were a competitive team because they were still trying to win, but they could not outpace the tank. They had their sights on Shaquille O'Neal. The Wolves, unfortunately, did not foresee what happened next. On May 10, 1992, After the regular season concluded and a month before the draft, Shaquille O'Neal made a public announcement. So Shaq's agent Leonard Armato sent a letter to the NBA and the Timberwolves. Quote, "O'Neal is prepared to sit out for the season if drafted by the Minnesota Timberwolves." Yikes. Ouch. Well, it looks like their tank got stuck in the ditch. Imagine waiting all year to draft Shaq, and you find out he won't even play for your team if you drafted him. The Wolves apparently didn't care and still wanted to draft him regardless, that is, if they got the #1 pick. It turns out that didn't happen either. Despite having the worst record in the league by a decent margin, they only managed to get the 3rd pick of the class. They missed out on Shaq, but they also missed out on Alonzo Mourning. While not as great as Shaq, obviously, Mourning was a perennial all-star, a phenomenal player back in his day as well. And certainly much better than what the Wolves got with the #3 pick, Christian Laettner.
What do you bring to the table here? These guys have talked about it. How do you feel about going to Minnesota?
Well, I feel very good about it, obviously. Minnesota is somewhere I want to go, and I'm looking forward to the challenge of going up there and helping the team win.
Deemed as arguably the greatest college player in history, Laettner's skill set did not transfer to the NBA as well as the Wolves hoped. And with the arrival of Kevin Garnett a few years later, Laettner became an afterthought. Perhaps I'd ask the question, how good do you think the Wolves would be if they got Shaq instead of KG? But considering Shaq would probably not even suit up for them, I guess it's not even a what-if scenario. It was never gonna happen. The Wolves were never gonna get him, regardless of their relentless tanking, which ended in futile. The 2002-03 Chicago Bulls. Even before the 2003 NBA draft happened, it was widely regarded as a legendary class, a draft that could change the fortunes of several franchises at once, due to the sheer amount of talent and potential these players had. And with a draft like this, you better believe some teams wanted a slice of that pie. One team in particular, the Chicago Bulls, tried their very best to snatch a high draft pick. The problem was, they weren't that bad. Over the past several years, they traded away several players, including Elton Brand, their former #1 pick. Ron Artest, Brad Miller, they got rid of them too. And their goal? To create a roster that simply could not compete, and hopefully be bad enough to land a top 5 pick in the 2003 draft. Their plan backfired. The Bulls exceeded their expectations compared to the 2 previous years, winning 30 games. As the season chugged along, they tried everything they could do to lose. They tried to insert a young 21-year-old Jamal Crawford into the starting lineup, giving him a surge of playing time, increasing his minutes from 20 per game to over 40 per game in the last 20 games of the year, hoping he'd build a house with all his bricks and help them lose. In fact, the Bulls had no desire to keep Jamal. According to Jamal himself, he stated that Jerry Krause had plans to build a super team by getting a star from the 03 class and teaming him up with Tim Duncan and Tracy McGrady. Yeah, it sounds ludicrous. How the hell is he supposed to pull this off? Anyway, when Jamal got inserted into the Bulls lineup, he performed better than expected and led the Bulls to more wins than they'd like. The Bulls finished with only the 7th worst record in the league and finished with the #7 pick in the lottery, just right outside of what they hoped for. Instead of D. Wade or Bosh, they ended up with Kirk Heinrich. I mean, he was a solid player for a couple years, but he was no star, and by not getting a star in the 03 class, Jerry Krause could not lure any other star players to come play with them. I mean, I can't see Duncan or T-Mac craving to play with Kirk Heinrich. The 2022-23 Portland Trailblazers. Portland had asked Damian Lillard to sit out the final 10 games of the 2022-23 regular season to help the franchise improve its lottery odds. He was told the higher the draft pick, the better chance they had at using the pick to facilitate a trade for a proven veteran player. Despite being in the race for a spot in the play-ins, the Blazers tanked the final 10 games of the season, going 1-9. Sadly, the Blazers' willingness to lose on purpose left a bad taste in the mouths of their players, in particular their franchise player, Dame. Initially seen as a Blazer lifer, he soured on the organization, and this was the final straw. A few months later, he requested a trade.
All right, we got breaking news out of the NBA here on this Saturday, Damian Lillard has requested a trade out of Portland.
It's not a surprise to me. When they drafted Scoot Henderson and Joe Cronin came out with the pretty explicit language that he was not going to trade Scoot Henderson, that he felt he was too good to be traded, a position that I agree with. At that point, to me, this became inevitable that Damian Lillard was going to be on the move.
Now, when it happened, this wasn't a bad thing for the Blazers. I mean, they needed to start over and rebuild from scratch anyway, and with this supporting cast around Dame, it clearly wasn't enough to compete for the title. However, the Blazers were very open about losing, and when the thought of Victor Wembanyama became a real possibility, they had to go for it. You can't miss a chance to get a once-in-a-generation talent like him. In the span of 2 weeks, the Blazers went from competing for the last spot in the play-ins to the most shameless tank I've ever seen. They finished the season with the NBA's 5th worst record, earning them a 10.5% chance at getting the number 1 pick. A 10.5% chance to change their franchise forever. In the last few weeks of the season, they managed to out-tank the Magic, the Pacers, the Wizards, and the Jazz to slide up the lottery board. When the balls were dropped, they got lucky even further, moving up a few spots to snatch the number 3 pick.
The 3rd pick belongs to the Portland Trailblazers.
And that's where the luck ends. I know it's too early to tell if they messed up with their selection, but early on, Scoot Henderson is most definitely not that guy. In fact, out of the top 5 picks, he's been the worst. So much so that the Blazers prefer to run 2 shooting guards in the backcourt instead of Scoot. Time will tell if this pick was worth it, but until then, we can only speculate. The 1996-97 Boston Celtics. The Celtics rarely have bad records. In fact, they are the winningest franchise of all time, the best all-time record of any team in NBA history. Yet the 1990s for the Celtics were considered a stain on their legacy, partly due to the death of Len Bias, who got drafted in 1986 but passed away shortly after. This led to them treading in mediocrity for basically a whole decade, and by the 1996-97 season, they realized there was only one way to get out of this slump. They needed to tank, with the goal to get the number 1 pick to draft Tim Duncan in the 1997 draft. Despite the notion of tanking being viewed with disdain back then, the Celtics in particular, their head coach, was quite open about doing it. So a guy named M.L. Carr was the coach of the Celtics. He wasn't just open about losing on purpose, but he was enthusiastic about it. Here's a quote from an interview years later where he described this infamous season. Quote, "I was bringing in guys like Nate Driggers and Brett Szabo. It was a joke. But the idea was not to make a move that would help us too much. I remember one game in particular when David Wesley was hitting jump shots and 3-pointers all over the floor. I had to get him out of the game. He came over to me and said, 'Coach, what are you doing? I just hit 4 shots in a row.' I said, 'I know, David, but I'm experimenting.' At one point, Red Auerbach came to me and said, 'I'm worried about you. You are taking such a beating.' I told him, 'Don't worry about me, Red. I'm the only one who can do this with a smile. I can take it. I never wanted to be a coach. I didn't care what it did to my reputation.'" The funniest thing about this is M.L. Carr only coached the Celtics for 2 seasons. Those 2 seasons were the only seasons he ever coached in the NBA, and after getting fired, he never got another chance to be a head coach. And he didn't want to either. The dude was on a mission to lose as much as he can because he knew that's the only way the Celtics could recover. He took the fall. Unfortunately, the 1997 lottery was not kind to the Celtics. Tim Duncan was the consensus number 1 pick, as we all know. The most surefire prospect in a long time, and so many teams this year were trying to tank for him, with the Celtics trying their absolute hardest. Yet, they could not catch a break, as they only managed to get the 3rd pick of that class, which they used to select Chauncey Billups. Now, Billups went on to have a fantastic career, but it wasn't with the Celtics. In fact, they gave up on him in the middle of his rookie season, trading him away in what turned out to be a horrendous trade. So not only did they miss out on Duncan, they also unknowingly traded away one of the best players of the draft. When the Celtics eventually rebuilt into playoff contenders, led by Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker, they were sorely missing a competent point guard for the longest time. Chauncey was the player they were missing, and he'd fit perfectly on the Celtics. Alas, not even the Celtics can get everything right, and since then, they haven't had a season where they truly tried to tank, ever again. Anyway, that's all folks. Those were 5 NBA teams that tried their absolute hardest to tank. But at the end of the day, their efforts did not work out. Some NBA teams are just blatantly tanking harder than ever before. Though it's become so commonplace that nobody even cares anymore. It's just how the NBA works, I guess. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the video. And of course, as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.